Good morning and welcome to the semi-finals of the 2026 Public Sector Debate Competition. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead in the TIU and your host for this match. The road to the championships is heating up. The stakes are even higher. We are now at the semi-finals where the final four teams return to the floor for one of the most decisive stages of the competition. Today, they will continue to put their research, reasoning, and argumentation skills to the test as they battle to determine their positions in the grand finale on July 9. We're delighted to have you here with us and extend a warm welcome to our online audience. Now, after an intense and highly competitive quarterfinals, we are pleased to celebrate the four teams that have secured their places in the semifinals. Administrator General's Department. Not here as yet, they'll play later today, Accountant General's Department. Also playing later today, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And here with us also is the Teaching Service. Four formidable teams, right? They have shown us what they've got and they continue to show us, and we look forward to today's match. To the teams whose journey ended in the quarterfinals, we say thank you. Your hard work, passion, and commitments added great value to the competition, and we encourage you to continue to follow the action as it unfolds. Don't forget that the fan favorite competition is still open. Keep rallying your supporters and encourage teams to cast their votes on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We are moments away from the action. Which of these four teams will rise to the occasion today and secure their place in the championship match on July 9, where the 2026 Public Sector Debate Competition champion will be crowned? And which teams will battle for third place in the playoff? The first deciding match is between the Administrator General's Department and the Teaching Service. They will debate the moot, be it resolved that protection from financial hardship in old age lies principally with the individual and not the state, where adequate pension coverage was reasonably within reach. Now, this moot raises an issue of national importance. It asks us to reflect on how individuals plan for retirement, how the state supports citizens in their later years, and where responsibility should properly lie when adequate pension coverage was available. Let us now get to meet the teams as they take on this timely and important issue. I'm sure many of you have been following the competition, and you would have seen these two impressive teams in action, and maybe you've identified your favorite debater. But for those of you joining us for the very first time, this is your opportunity to meet the teams. We begin with Team Proposition, the Administrator General's Department. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Lewis, first speaker for said proposition.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Moore, second speaker. My name is Julian King, third speaker for Team Proposition.
Let's cheer them on. The all-female team going up against the all-male team. The Teaching Service. Gentlemen, please introduce yourself.
Good day, my name is Kevin Grant.
And I am Rasheen Nelson.
And I'm Tevin Cameron.
Thank you, Team Opposition. Clap them. Yes. Our adjudicators are from our partners in this competition, the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, JADE. And we also have a very special guest adjudicator with us today. Judges, please introduce yourselves, starting with our chair adjudicator.
Thank you very much, Aniki Clark. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the semifinals of this competition. I'm Jermaine Barrett. I'll be the chair adjudicator for this match. Best of luck to both teams.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Rabban Thomas Matthews, and I'll be serving as one of your wing adjudicators. And good luck to both teams.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lacardiga Nelson. Congratulations on making it to the semifinals, and all the best today.
Good morning, everyone. Keenan Faulkner. I am the guest judge for today. Congratulations on making it to this stage of the competition, and I appreciate the opportunity to share in this moment.
Thank you so much, judges and Keenan. I will not stand between you and the arguments any further. At this point, I will hand over to Chair Adjudicator Jermaine Barrett, who will guide the teams through their paces. All that's left for me to do is to wish both these awesome teams a wonderful match. Let's go.
Thank you again, Aniki Clark. Teams, you are on the verge of greatness. This competition is this match rather, stands between you and the grand finals of the competition. Anyway, let's get the show on the road. First of all, you're very familiar with the rules, but for the sake of our viewing audience, we'll go through them as we do each match. So for this match, we are guided by the Jade Parliamentary Debate format. In this format, each team has 3 debaters. The first debater on each team speaks for 7 minutes. The second debater speaks for 6 minutes. The third and final debater, we call it the reply speaker, their presentation will be within 5 minutes. After the first pair of debaters have presented their speeches, we'll enter the first period of cross-examination. We'll enter another period of cross-examination after the second pair of speeches have been delivered. Thereafter, we'll pause for 1 minute, and then after the 1 minute pause, we will resume with the reply speaker from the opposition side first. Then we will conclude the debate with the reply speaker's presentation from the proposition team. Debaters, please be reminded of the time signals. You will hear a ding of a bell signaling that you've spoken for 1 minute. Another ding of the bell signals that you have 1 minute remaining. 2 dings of the bell indicates that you have consumed the allotted time, but we're kind, so we give you 15 seconds extra. At the end of that extra grace period, we will ding the bell continuously, strongly indicating to you that you must relieve yourself or move from the lectern and allow the match to continue. All right? Debaters, do you have any questions? All right, so is that a question? Not yet. Well, you might not want to ask me questions. You'll ask your opponents questions in the debate. So let's get started. At this time, I call upon the first proposition speaker who comes to us from the Administrator General's Department. Hear, hear.
Proper preparation prevents poor performance. Sentiments commonly echoed to remind persons that success comes to those who prepare rather than wait for life to happen. Mr. Speaker, panel, debaters, and supporters, good morning. The moot before us reads, be it resolved that protection from financial hardship in old age lies principally with the individual and not the state, where adequate pension coverage was reasonably within reach. A logical premise which side proposition proudly supports. But before we begin to share our compelling reasons why this is so, allow me to define the key terms. Financial hardship refers to circumstances that make it difficult to keep up with debt payments and pay reasonable basic living expenses such as food, housing, and healthcare. Old age, in this case, will refer to the retirement age of 60 to 65. Principally means mainly, more than anything or anyone else. Adequate pension coverage refers to retirement savings mechanisms that are reasonably capable of providing sufficient income in old age. Reasonably within reach, now it's a crucial qualifier. It means that the individual had a realistic opportunity to participate in or secure pension coverage. It excludes persons who genuinely could not contribute due to extreme poverty, certain disabilities, chronic unemployment, or other structural barriers. So we're not arguing here that the state has no role in social protection. We're not arguing that the vulnerable elderly should be abandoned. Our case is much more practical. Our burden today is to show that protection from financial hardship is attainable for the common man, through his own capacity, rather than it being the burden of the state. We will win this debate with me successfully demonstrating that the primary actor and architect of retirement surety is the individual, not at this time, using all tools at his disposal, and that shifting the principal burden to the state creates moral hazard. Our second speaker will highlight the sociological perspectives and comparative global analysis, and our third speaker will hammer it home by showing that our point stood firm despite any clashes that may come up in this debate. So let's begin. Jamaica already provides a strong foundation, but where there are gaps in coverage, this calls for improvement, not a shift in responsibility. Some would argue that the state has failed to provide a solid foundation for persons to build on, but adequate pension architecture is available to the Jamaican populace. That architecture includes 3 pillars. 1, the government-managed system with mandatory participation, the NIS. 2, privately managed pension plans and approved retirement schemes such as the Sagicor Life and JMMB retirement plans. And 3, personal savings. In a 2021 report, it was noted that all employees between the ages of 18 to 70 are legally mandated to be registered under the NIS and contribute to the scheme, regardless whether they're working full-time, part-time, or on probation. I'll take you soon. Please sit down. This includes domestic, agricultural, seasonal, and self-employed workers. However, the pension industry of Jamaica in their 2022 concept has noted that Jamaica's shifting democratic structure has put a growing part of the population at risk of old age poverty and exposes the government to a future fiscal crisis. Public safety nets such as the NIS, the National Health Fund, and the Jamaica Drug for the Elderly program are not reaching all our elderly, and it will not be sufficient for them to enjoy an adequate quality of life in retirement. The FSC has noted that as of December 31st, 2025, contributors to both public and private pension arrangements amounted to just less than 20% of the employed labor force. Employers also provide the option to match an employee's contribution of pension plans at a range of 5 to 20%, but Mr. Speaker, most only contribute the minimum 5%. The fact is, many actors rely heavily on the NIS as they approach retirement, but it was never meant to fully replace a person's pre-retirement savings. Go ahead.
All of what you're explaining is exactly supporting the idea that the government is taking responsibility for the security of the individual in the old age.
Thank you, my opponent. I'll continue. What you must note on that note is that the fact is many actors are relying heavily on the NIS, which is the point, as they approach retirement, but it was never meant to fully replace a person's pre-retirement savings. It must be noted here that retirement or old age is inevitable. It's a foreseeable future event. Ladies and gentlemen, God spare with life. Usually, it means that if persons enter the workforce between the ages of 18 to 25, it means they have roughly 40 to 47 years of earning potential, and laying proper building blocks on that foundation provided by the secondary actor of the state is important, because what that does is that it shows where many people spend 20 years or more in retirement. Planning ahead is increasingly important for long-term financial stability. Therefore, reliance cannot be on the state as the actor to fund the livelihoods of our aging populace for their basic needs. Question is not whether they're tools or whether there are any tools at all, or whether they are adequate, when truthfully the adequacy of the proven pillars have been tried, tested, and proven. The question is whether those tools have been used well enough, and the answer is no. Now to our next point. Jamaicans not making full use of the pension coverage available has placed a hefty burden on the state, and it creates a moral hazard. If the state becomes the principal guarantor for everyone who had a fair opportunity to prepare and did not, then we create a dangerous incentive structure. I'm sorry you got one already. People will begin to believe that regardless of their choices, the state will absorb the consequences. That weakens personal discipline, reduces incentives to save, and places more pressure on public resources that are already limited. The state funds public health care, PATH, and other social support programs, and these systems, truthfully, are under pressure. If the state becomes a principal actor and a principal rescuer of people who declined to prepare despite having the opportunity, who ultimately pays? It will be the other taxpayers who did plan ahead. We would be shifting the cost of avoidable under-preparation from the actual actors to taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, against the backdrop of our population profile growing older and having an increasing life expectancy, the question is, when someone had a fair opportunity to prepare, who should bear the consequences of not doing so? And we say the individual. So in conclusion, seek a friend before you need a friend. The state's responsibility of providing a solid foundation will continue to supplement financial planning. However, the principal responsibility must be on the individual to make use of all the tools available to prevent financial hardship by retirement. To rule otherwise would undermine personal accountability, create burdens on taxpayers, and encourage dependency and strain Jamaica's already limited resources. The state may support, but it cannot and should not be the primary actor for avoiding retirement insecurity. For these reasons, we proudly stand by this motion. The proposition passes.
We thank the first proposition speaker for opening this debate and now invite the first opposition speaker to open the opposition's case. Of course, the opposition team is a teaching service. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to start with refutations this time. Now, first of all, 50% of what the proposition argued is essentially arguing for the opposition's case. The NIS scheme is essentially the government's method of showing its responsibility for securing the financial stability of people after retirement age. Now, what makes their case even worse is that she argues that in status quo with this scheme, people are finding ways to circumvent contributing to the cheapest available means of securing your financial stability in the future. No, if they are avoiding that no, what do they think is going to happen when government says it's no longer my responsibility and it is wholly your responsibility? When they are forced to rely on finding the more expensive means of contributing to a pension scheme. No, it is obvious to see what will happen. If no, they are avoiding the cheaper approach, they are more likely to
Point
not
of information.
contribute at all to the more expensive approach. I'll take you now. Go ahead.
My opponent, the mood didn't say that the government was going to totally abscond responsibility, just not be primarily responsible.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Now, let us in fact get to what the moot is about then, because they missed the point entirely. First of all, it is the point that the government ought to take the responsibility. And they argued this whole idea about whether or not people who can afford it should do it, and they missed the true essence of it. Responsibility is not hinged on your ability. Responsibility is something that is absolute. Now, we are going to talk about a social contract theory. Let us start first with the ethical motivation to act. There are two ethical motivations. If you are following deontology, then you act based on the outcome. That is primarily what they are talking about. People can afford it, so they should just go ahead and do it. This is flawed in thinking. The second ethical motivation is teleology, which says that the government ought to act on something simply because it is the right thing to do. That is why it is the government's responsibility to do this. Now, what does social contract theory tells us? Social contract theory asks us to imagine a world where there is no government. When there is no government, people are left with three fundamental rights: the right to life, the right to property, and the right to freedom. Yes, the right to freedom, right? Now, the problem is that when there is no government acting, these rights are vulnerable because people are going to want to take it in their pursuit of maximizing, that's a key word here, maximizing their access to the right. That's why England used to go about and try to take away land and property. So the purpose of the government is to protect these rights. Now, in status quo, now that we have a government protects the rights for the child in the sense that the government makes it mandatory, makes it mandatory for parents to protect the children. And if the parents fail in that regard, the government jumps in. Now, what does the government do in protecting the working class? It ensures that an economy is functional so that they can get a job. Furthermore, it goes further and provides a minimum wage to protect them. Now, the question is, How does the government protect these rights for the old people? They can't rely on their children because not everybody is going to have children. And furthermore, even those who have children, they could die, God forbid. The surest way for the government to protect the life, the liberty, and the property of the old people is to provide them with pension. This establishes, Mr. Speaker, the idea that pension must not be seen as something you access because you can afford it. It is a fundamental human right in society. There is no other way for the government to assure an elderly person that they can function in a society that the worst, Mr. Speaker, it's the government who set up society in such a way that you cannot access life. You cannot access property. You cannot access freedom unless you have money. Old people cannot work by their own definition. They must stop working by their definition at age 60 and 65. And so what or where are they going to assuredly get money? That's another key word. The government's responsibility is to assure access to these things. They cannot assure it in a world where it is primarily the responsibility of the person. In their own first speaker argument, Mr. Speaker, they said that these people are finding ways not to contribute to NIS. So what do you think is going to happen when NIS is no longer there? It is no longer the responsibility of the government. They are worse going to circumvent that. Then the government would have failed in its fundamental role to protect every category of citizens when it comes to every aspect of their life. Now, Mr. Speaker, this makes it even worse now. Because, Mr. Speaker, they are arguing for the idea that maximizing your access to these rights is supposed to be the goal here. No, the government's role is to provide the basic access and the basic protection. That's what the pension scheme is for. What they are advocating for, going to Sajikora or other these places, is under the category of maximizing what the government allows for you. Protection and security is the responsibility of government. That's why police exist. That's why JDF exists. But you can maximize your access to protection by hiring a private protection firm or getting a licensed firearm. Those are things that are maximizing what the government has a responsibility to do for you. And that's what government should do. They should provide the sure access through a pension scheme because everything else is volatile. When financial sector crashes, like what happened with FinSAC, then the pension schemes disappear. The FinSAC was literally the government recognizing that these people have no other way of surviving, so we have to fix it. We need to be proactive and allow the government to take responsibility for preventing these collapses. Their world is vulnerable, but with the government, it is sure. Thank you.
We thank the first opposition speaker for his energetic presentation. We now move to the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team, the teaching service, gets a chance to ask 3 questions of the proposition team, the Auditor General's department. Each question is limited to 10 seconds. Each response, Auditor General, limited to 45 seconds. Teaching service, you may now pose your questions.
Considering the vulnerable nature of private pension schemes, how does, in your world, the government provide a guarantee protection for the financial stability of the elderly?
My opponents, do not be confused. The government already provides a guaranteed structure through the NIS as it is mandatorily and legally required that everyone participates. Through private pensions, though, that's an added layer of security, and the government will, while they reform the system and ensure proper procedure is followed, that will ensure that that persons are well secured.
And private pension schemes are vulnerable, but they are not failing. My opponent, what you didn't mention is Sagicor, JMMB, FGB, all those successful private pension schemes. My opponent, the government has a responsibility, but what you've conflated is solely with primary versus secondary. The government is not taking a primary responsibility. We're taking, okay.
What do you believe should be the government's response when it realizes that its citizens are constrained and cannot adequately make the proper preparation that you talk about?
My opponent, that is not what the motion requires us to argue. It is not the citizens who are constrained. It is not the citizens who are unable to make the proper preparation. Be not misled, my adjudicators. We're talking about the citizens that had adequate pension coverage within reach. It was accessible. It was affordable. It was reasonably within reach, and they chose not to invest. And they are the primary actor who have lived off certain life choices. And we on Team Proposition is saying we cannot give the government primary liability for primary actors where they should be held primary responsible. So again, primary actor, primary responsibility. We can't shift the burden to the government. That is absurd, that is ludicrous, that is financial madness.
Is the proposition arguing that it is not possible that 5 years down the line, this person who can right now access proper pension will not fall into financial problem?
My opponent, again, we have to stay on course with what the moot requires us to discuss, yeah? We're not saying they're not falling in financial problem. We're not discussing in isolation elderly poverty. What we are saying is that there are individuals, there are primary actors who had adequate pension services, which means that the 3 tiers they were exposed to. Saving plans, pension plans, and NIS that is mandated by the government. And then these individuals have 40 years. My opponent is giving us 5 years. We have 40 years before we know we're getting old. And when we don't start in 2002, we could have started in 2012 or we could have started in 2022. But we must start because the motion requires that the government provide adequate coverage, and adequate coverage is provided because it is accessible, it is reasonably within reach, and individuals can... Oh.
Yes? Oh, one more question. Oh. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. That was your third question. Thanks for the response. Auditor General, Administrator General, sorry. Administrator General, you may now pose your 3 questions to the teaching service.
Thank you. My opponents, if the state bears the principal burden for all citizens, aren't we actively diluting the resources available to help the destitute who have no other choice?
No. In fact, it is actually making it more possible for the government to be able to support them. So when the government is first of all, the problem with your argument is you present this NIS as not the government's pension scheme. Pension is a part of the NIS program. So let us establish that first of all. So in status quo, there is such a thing. When it is no longer the government's burden to foot it, then there is no longer legal requirement that the government can place upon the wealthier people to contribute to such a scheme. So when they no longer contribute to such a scheme, there is actually less money available in the fund to be dispersed to everybody. So in your world, there's actually a greater risk of the government not being able to accrue enough funds to be able to support the vulnerable.
Okay, my opponents, we're not advocating for the removal of the government's responsibility. But when the government is faced with an economic crisis in your world and is forced to implement austerity measures, where does that leave the individual who puts 100% in the state?
Could you repeat?
Yes. When the government is faced with an economic crisis and is forced to implement austerity measures, where does that leave the individual who puts 100% trust in the state?
I mean, perhaps you missed the core of what I said. The person is no longer the same thing you're accusing us of doing, you're doing now. The government is the primary person with responsibility for the pension. The person is therefore still free to provide, to contract or contribute to a private pension scheme. And so there is no world where we're suggesting that that cannot happen. But the problem in your world is that when they rely primarily on these private schemes, when there is austerity situations in the financial sector, then it puts them at risk. That is exactly what happened in FinSac. When the crashes happened, a lot...
My opponent, if individuals know the state will remain principally responsible regardless of their own choices, what incentive remains for prudent retirement planning?
The prudent retirement planning is the government securing the retirement for them. We are arguing that in your world, when it is guaranteed now that they have a safety net, you argue that they are still trying to find a way not to contribute to it. So the logical mind thinks that if when it is easy to participate in such a planning scheme, they are more likely not to do it when it becomes harder. A private pension scheme is harder by virtue of the amount of contribution, and we argue it is even more volatile. The match is about what secures most guaranteedly the protection of the elderly people. A private scheme will not guarantee it, but with a government scheme taking the responsibility, it's guaranteed.
Mr. Speaker.
No, I have one more question.
All right, thank you very much. Having quite a passionate debate here. Appreciate the exchanges. We now continue this debate with the second speaker from the proposition team, the Administrator General's Department. Hear, hear.
Good morning, everyone. Don't be misled by the opposition's loudness. They are departing from the mood. When we talk about responsibility being absolute, indeed, but responsibility goes both ways. Our opposition talks about human right, but the government had made adequate and made pension systems adequate and accessible, and so they have indeed satisfied the human rights role. Adjudicators, everyone, good morning. My first speaker already had laid the foundation for this case, and I rise just to build on that foundation with two further points. Sociological theory supports our position. Responsibility should follow agency, and that successful international pension systems don't undermine our case, they reinforce it. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of this debate lies a fundamental question. Should the government carry principal responsibility for a citizen's life after retirement when that citizen had access to pension structures during their working years? Our answer is simply no. The actor with the greatest control over an outcome should bear the greatest responsibility for that outcome, which leads me to my first substantive. Responsibility should follow agency. Renowned sociologist Anthony Giddens, in his structuration theory, not right now, explains that society is built through the continuous interplay of structure and agency. Structure refers to the systems and institutions that shape behavior, like tax regimes and pension schemes. They provide the framework. Agency is the power of individuals to make choices, whether to obey the law, to save, or to plan for retirement.
On that point.
Not right now. But here's the key. Structures only function if agents act within them. A pension system, for example, only works if individuals contribute, save, and plan. As Anthony Giddens explains, agents engage in what he calls reflexive monitoring. And this is a continual process of observing our circumstances and making decisions about how we want to live. Not right now. Mr. Speaker, people don't just simply inherit a way of being. We actively construct one. We choose to go to school to learn and get an education. We choose our careers, how we raise our family, and we choose how we spend our money. And Retirement planning is a part of that same reflexive process, not at this time. With nearly 9% of Jamaica's population over 65 years old and life expectancy rising, retirement is not a hidden risk. It is a predictable stage of life. People enter the labor force knowing that one day their earning power will decline. That makes the duty to prepare not unreasonable, but integral to responsible adulthood. The opposition may argue that structure limits agency, not at this time. But Mr. Speaker, limitation is not elimination. Even within constraints, individuals retain meaningful room to act. Despite the existence of more than 700 registered pension schemes in Jamaica, coverage remains stagnant at around 12% of the labor force. This means that nearly 9 out of 10 workers are uncovered, not because structures aren't present, but because the individuals are not participating. Consider the numbers. Jamaica's labor force is approximately 1.4 million people. Less than 200% are enrolled in private pension schemes. Meanwhile, pension assets, not at this time, have grown to over 800 billion, proving that the system is financially viable for those who choose to act. Mr. Speaker, if the Jamaican government were to guarantee even the basic NIS pension of $3,400 per week to all uncovered workers, the annual bill will exceed 222 billion, consuming over 10% of the GDP, destabilizing public finances and crowding out spending on education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The fiscal reality underscores a deeper principle. No, thank you. As Giddens reminds us, structure provides the framework, but agency activates them. Mr. Speaker, the actor with the greatest control over an outcome should bear the greatest responsibility for that outcome. Put plainly, he who calls the tune pays the piper. This moves me to my second substantive. Successful retirement systems around the world are built on individual responsibility, supported by the state. The strongest pension systems in the world do not treat citizens as passive recipients of state rescue. Singapore's Central Provident Fund, CPF, proves that successful retirement systems are built on individual responsibility, supported by the state. By mandating that workers and employers contribute 37% of monthly wages, the CPF ensures that the individuals consistently save for retirement. The system works, Mr. Speaker, because mandatory contributions prevent undersaving, while government-guaranteed interest rate of up to 6% protects and grows those savings over time. The impact is clear. Citizens retire with sufficient funds, reducing poverty among the elderly and lowering reliance on the welfare programs, which leads to the state avoiding unsustainable fiscal burdens. Additionally, the Netherlands pension system is widely regarded as one of the strongest retirement systems in the world. It guarantees a basic pension, but the majority of the retirement income typically comes from employer and individual savings. This is what currently obtains in Jamaica's status quo. The difference is participation. In the Netherlands, citizens widely engage in additional schemes. In Jamaica, while the framework exists, uptake is far lower. That is why reinforcing individual responsibility is not optional, but essential to sustainability. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, this debate asks whether the individual, when pension coverage was reasonably available, should remain the primary actor responsible for avoiding financial hardship in old age. Our answer is yes. The proposition pauses.
Thank you very much. Second proposition speaker. We now call upon the second opposition speaker to make their presentation. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to jump into some rebuttals before I go into my substantives. Now, on this side, what we get at best is that if all works well, then the plan works. But on our side, what we are seeing is that there's a perpetual safety net, and we believe that that is very important. They tell us that responsibility is dependent on the affordability, and it's linked to affordability. But if that were the case, then parents who are not able to afford certain things should not provide education for their children. We shouldn't pay our taxes if we can't afford it. And if affordability is the primary issue, then we see how that falls apart. They also tell us that the government has already made it accessible for all. Then if it has been accessible for all, what then are they arguing? And in that case, how do we account for education and other responsibilities? They quoted 200 billion, and we have read the government's white paper that proposes the institution of this enrollment for pension, and it states that at maximum it will be $24 billion in addition to what exists now. Let's look at this from a pragmatic approach. We must understand, I'll tell you when I'm ready, understand that the government acts as a public trustee. Government ought to use its unique capacity to prevent foreseeable and avoidable harm to its citizens. This naturally leads to pragmatic action, which I will outline. I want to look at the pragmatic actions in terms of the incentives, which answers a lot of what they have said. I will tell you when I'm ready.
Okay.
Incentives, and also look at the outcomes, since they want to go along that line. Now, the incentives. Are Jamaicans really more likely to save and invest consistently when they know that they are primarily responsible for their retirement security? Financial decisions are not made on a level playing field. Everybody experiences different challenges. Some of these include wage stagnation, responsibility to take care of their elders, healthcare emergencies, economic constrictions, and limited financial literacy. Accessibility does not guarantee meaningful affordability because the market risks are beyond the control of these individuals. There's inflation, there's pension fund failure, there's unexpected longevity, there's rising healthcare costs. The proposition assumes that responsibility automatically creates incentive. We disagree. Retirement is a delayed benefit occurring decades into the future, while food, rent, transportation, and childcare are immediate costs. Unsurprisingly to us, individuals will prioritize these present needs over future security because they have to survive now. You can't save for the future and dead now. The state is best positioned to pool these risks across the society and improve the possibility for better outcomes. So the government is the only actor that can not only improve the standing for those in the formal industries, but also private sector and the informal industries. And we saw how the government had to step in to help out those in the tourist sector to create for them a pension scheme, because the government knows that it is the best actor to get this done. This means that with automatic enrollment, the government protects these persons and their better prospects, not just for those in the formal industries, but for all persons. This is important because only on our side is there a safety net for all citizens. The outcomes that we want to talk about quickly.
My opponent, since we've already satisfied the bar of accessibility, access exists. Who is primarily responsibility?
All right, so we told you that responsibility lies with the government because of the principled arguments, and we are showing you pragmatically why the government is the best actor. So, listen carefully. Outcomes. To do justice to this issue, we must answer the question of where responsibility lies, which was done by opening speaker. And also, we must look at the fact that the outcomes are needed on a scaled level. Who is best able to do this? Now, protecting our citizens from financial hardship in old age necessarily means covering certain things such as housing, food, healthcare, daily living expenses, and long-term care. According to Statin, 9 out of 10 persons who retire face old age poverty. This is a significant subset of our society. And these persons end up perpetuating a problem. They're perpetuated by dependence on relatives or dependence on the government. Let's look at both. When they're dependent on relatives, relatives have to divert these funds from their family obligations, including investment and pension plans, and the younger generation faces an increased financial risk. This leads to lower financial and economic outcomes for them, and it perpetuates the age-old problem. If it's the government, which in many cases it is, our opponents assume that if the government reduces its responsibility, the cost disappears. That's not the case. Someone must absorb these consequences. The cost merely shifts from pensions now to crisis management later. And I tell you what I mean. The proposition tells us that the pension coverage was within reach. Yet according to the PIOJ, between 80 to 90% of Jamaicans enter retirement without a private or personal pension. If the overwhelming majority of citizens fail to achieve retirement security through individual action, assigning principal responsibility to these individuals is not prudent, it is wishful thinking. Social pensions are a serious issue in Jamaica. In contrast, the government incurs costs later on through hospital welfare programs, poor relief, housing support, and all of these deferred costs which are then multiplied. And this is according to the Pension Association of Jamaica. In our world, the government guarantees a baseline pension, and it allows persons to save if they wish, and the government prevents large-scale elderly poverty. The costs are therefore planned, predictable, efficient, and lower over time. Is that my time?
Thank you very much for that speech, second opposition speaker. We now continue with the second segment, rather, of cross-examination. In this segment, the difference is that the proposition team Administrator General's Department, gets a chance to ask their questions first of the opposition team teaching services. All of the rules remain the same. So, Administrator General, you may begin.
Why should the financial burden fall on taxpayers rather than on the individual who chose not to secure it?
Because you agreed by virtue of not engaging with my argument, and your second speaker agreed that we can in fact think of pension as a fundamental human right. It is the burden of the government to protect and allow access to those fundamental human rights. And so because it is a fundamental human right, your access to the fundamental human right is never contingent on your affordability. And that is the flaw in your argument. Because responsibility for fundamental human rights rests with the government, it is therefore primarily the government's responsibility to protect that. Anything done, what you are arguing for, is merely an extension or an ability to maximize access.
My opponent, you said that we shouldn't save now and die later, but the people that we're talking about are those who party now, have no savings, and then want to live big later?
We didn't say that you shouldn't save.
Mm-hmm.
What we are saying is that the reality for most persons is that they cannot, because of the economic constrictions, cannot afford to do that. They have to make a choice between now and the future. Obviously, they're going to choose now. And you seem to be pitting persons against taxpayers and believe that everybody is just big and careless and does not plan for the future. The reality is that there are many persons who are victims of our harsh economic circumstances.
Even
and this is a larger subsector than those who party and waste their lives.
Even those who can afford it eventually have to come to a decision about what they do now. That was his argument. When they are faced with that crossroads, they are more likely to abandon the private pension scheme to support this struggle now.
My opponent, you went down this wormhole about the people not able to afford it, but didn't we define the actors as those excluded from hardship or poverty where it was out of reach?
Which is why we said, even those who can afford it will eventually, may eventually, probably eventually face a crossroads where they have to decide between continuing these private pension schemes or supporting the living. No, that's what Roshane argued. The problem in your world is that when the government is not the primary person responsibility for pensions, then they are likely to switch and the harm is great. But when the government has primary role, the support and the protection is guaranteed. It's never guaranteed in your world.
In addition to that, we are saying it's not just going to benefit those who can afford it, but those...
Out of order.
Thank you very much. Sounds like we have an adjudicator in the audience.
My apologies.
All right, thank you very much for that phase of cross-examination. We continue now as we make way for the questions from the opposition team teaching service.
Is retirement security a reward for good financial planning, or is it a mechanism through which elderly citizens maintain access to their rights?
Can you repeat, please?
Is retirement security a reward for good financial planning, or is it a mechanism through which elderly citizens maintain access to their rights?
I'm glad that you asked that, Mr. Speaker, because retirement security is both. You are rewarded when you make hay while the sun shines. You are rewarded when you use the capacity while it was within reach. Outside of that, we have said time and time again that the government also provides an additional safety net. The government is also there to catch you through NIS, through NHT, through the National Health Fund and others. Mr. Speaker, what we don't understand is that we keep saying the government has a primary responsibility, and the opposition is showing the debate giving the government total control or no control, when the motion requires that we argue primary responsibility versus secondary responsibility.
If the government eventually intervenes through health care, welfare, housing, or poor relief, why shouldn't the government be, and other social things, why shouldn't the government be the leading actor in preventing the hardship?
Mr. Speaker, again, the opposition has misled this debate. The primary actor already exists. The primary actor is already the person vested with the choice and the responsibility. What the government has to satisfy is a human rights guarantee, and that is providing a structure, and the MOOT already tells us that this exists. The MOOT says an adequate coverage. Adequate speak to accessibility and affordability. These people had adequate coverage. They could access it and they could afford it. The government has also gone ahead to make a three-tier system. We say NHT, mandatory, must. We mandate it by law. And then we say pension schemes, JMMB, as low as $1,000 per week or FGB, and then we say additional savings, Mr. Speaker.
Our final question, Mr. Speaker. Is the proposition arguing that it is impossible for private firms to adjust pension benefits?
Go again.
Is the proposition argued that it's impossible for private firms to adjust pension benefits, and are they protected from financial crash, which affects the pensions?
No, Mr. Speaker, the proposition is not arguing that, because the motion doesn't require us to argue that. What it requires us to look at is responsibility. Who is responsible after adequate, equating to access and affordability, was within reach, mean you could have gotten it throughout your lifetime, and you chose not to? Who should bear the primary responsibility? We're not telling you that we're going to toss our elderly to the wolf. We're not saying that, okay, it is not the government duty to have this human right in place, but it is in place. This motion surround who is responsible. Don't spend your life making bad financial choices, having adequate pension scheme within reach, choosing not to utilize them, and then tell the government, say, I want to live a cherry garden.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much to both teams for the second phase of cross-examination. Yes, I think a round of applause is deserving. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now pause the debate for 1 minute, after which we'll resume with the reply speaker from the opposition team, the teaching service. Thereafter, the debate will conclude with that speech, the reply speech from the proposition team, the Administrator General's Department. Teams, your 1 minute pause begins now. But as that you say is not legitimate, but I just don't. Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to move to the conclusion of this debate. At this time, we invite the third speaker, the reply speaker, from the teaching service rather, to conclude the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this debate, government proved that people should save, people should plan, and people should prepare for retirement. Opposition never disagreed. The problem is that the motion was never asking whether individuals have responsibility. It asks whether those responsibilities become the principal safeguard against financial hardship in old age. To win this debate, government needed to prove that once these pension opportunities exist, the state's obligation ends. They never proved that. Instead, this debate came down to 4 questions, and we're going to tell you what these questions are. 1, does access create moral obligation sufficient to transfer responsibility? 2, what does within reach actually mean? 3, should early security be individual or collective? And finally, who is best positioned to manage the risk of old age? The first question. Government assumes that because pension opportunities exist, individuals should bear the principal burden of retirement security. But access to an opportunity does not extinguish duty to protect. The existence of school does not eliminate the state's responsibility for education. The existence of hospital doesn't eliminate the state's responsibility for healthcare. Likewise, the existence of pension scheme does not eliminate the state's responsibility for retirement protection. Kevon showed that the government exists to protect access to life, liberty, and property. If financial security is necessary to access healthcare, food, housing, and dignity in old age, then retirement protection becomes one of the mechanisms through which those rights are preserved. Government proved opportunities existed. They never prove why that opportunity transfer the principal burden of protection away from the state. Second question, what does within reach actually mean? Government wants us to take it as being technically available. Opposition says it means genuinely attainable. Roshane showed that retirement decisions are made in the context of inflation, wage stagnation, caregiving responsibilities, healthcare emergencies, and economic downturns. The reality matters because opportunity is not the same thing as capacity. Government's position requires us to believe that if pension coverage exists, failure to secure retirement must be an individual failure. Yet between 80 and 90%, as Roshane talked, Jamaicans enter retirement without private pension. More persuasive explanation is not widespread irresponsibility. It is many citizens face structural barriers that make participation difficult. Government proves availability, opposition proves attainability. That is why we win the clash on reasonable within reasonable reach. The third question is whether retirement security should be treated as an individual responsibility or collective guarantee. Opposition demonstrated that consequences of retirement insecurity are never borne solely by the retiree. When elderly citizens fall into poverty, family absorbs, community absorbs, healthcare system absorbs, the government absorbs the burden. Government's mud does not eliminate costs, it merely shifts them. What could have been addressed through prevention becomes crisis managed later through welfare programs, healthcare interventions, and family support. The choice before the House is therefore not between collective responsibility and no responsibility. It is between prevention and crisis management. Opposition chooses prevention because prevention is both humane and more efficient. This leads to the most important question. Who is best positioned to manage risk at old age? Government treats old age as a planning problem. Opposition treats it as a vulnerability problem. That distinguish matters because planning is something individuals do, but vulnerability is precisely why government exists. Old age combined declining economic power, rising healthcare costs, reduced recovery from financial shocks, and increased dependence on fixed incomes. Government repeatedly reminded us that people know when they will get old. We agree, but predictability does not eliminate vulnerability. We know hurricanes will come. We know illness will occur. We know aging is inevitable. Yet, of many of these issues, government must be responsible for managing our predictable vulnerabilities. Russian showed that retirement insecurity is shaped by inflation, healthcare costs, economic downturns, and longevity risks. These risks individuals cannot fully control. An individual can stay responsible and still overwhelmed by inflation. An individual can plan prudently and still face catastrophic medical costs. The state, however, can pool risks across millions of citizens, regulate pension systems, spread costs across generations, and intervene before poverty occurs. Individuals can manage their own risk. The state can manage society's risk. That is why countries such as Mauritius, Botswana, and Barbados increasingly recognize retirement security as a public responsibility rather than merely a private one. In closing, Mr. Speaker, we prove that pension opportunities does not eliminate states' obligation to protect. We prove that within reach means more than technical availability. We prove that consequences of retirement insecurity are collective, and we prove that the state possesses greater capacity than individuals to manage the vulnerabilities of old age, and we're proud to oppose this motion.
Thank you very much. Third speaker, reply speaker there from the opposition team representing the teaching service. Ladies and gentlemen, the debate now comes to a conclusion with the presentation from the third speaker from the proposition team, concluding the case on behalf of the Administrator General's Department. Here.
All protocols observed. Mr. Speaker, today before us is an actor's motion. The principal actor that we're discussing is someone earning enough that they're able to pay pension funds but has chosen not to do so. Mr. Speaker, retirement doesn't reward excuses. It rewards Jamaicans who prepared while the opportunity was within reach. Jamaicans who made hay while the sun shines. Mr. Speaker, the opposition attempts to tell you that this motion was cruel and how dare you expect old people to fend for themselves. Mr. Speaker, throughout the entire notion, the opposition speaks as though that old people were born old and that they didn't have time to plan for their retirement and that they didn't have 40 years. Mr. Speaker, third speaker came up here and tell us that we know that old age is coming the same way we know that a hurricane is coming, but we have 3 months to prepare for a hurricane and 40 years to prepare for old age. How is that a reasonable comparison? Mr. Speaker, the opposition gave us baseless, toothless, bottomless arguments when they told us a few things that doesn't go so. They told us that there's no baseline pension. That is after my first speaker came and laid out the structured baseline mandated NIS by the government, pension plans and saving. Mr. Speaker, the opposition told us that total control by the government or no control. But what I need you to understand is that primary personal responsibility is different from a guaranteed structure. Let's correct some misconception. What the government has a duty to do is to ensure that the adequate pension scheme exists and that they are reasonably within reach. Mr. Speaker, first speaker on the opposition team is dragging us away with the contradiction when he told us that there are people who can afford it, but then will have to choose to pay pension or buy food. I don't know if it's me, but if you can afford it, you can pay your pension and buy food, right? That is what affordability means. It means that you don't have to choose between the two. Mr. Speaker, team opposition came up here and they tried to lament on FinSAC, one failing pension scheme, and not take into account the other 700 pension schemes that exist today in Jamaica, as my second speaker said, that aren't being utilized by the common man. Mr. Speaker, we must put it to you that the pension scheme that currently exists meet people where they are. That the motion already tells us that adequate coverage means affordability and accessibility, and that it is within reach. Mr. Speaker, the motion already chooses for us who the primary actor is, and that is the individual. Now, what we are asking, right, is the individual abscond their ability? Should the government now has a primary responsibility? And what we're saying is that the government should be responsible, but not primarily responsible, because responsibility has to follow agency. My opponent came up here and gave us arguments surrounding human rights and that the government must satisfy its human rights tier. But, Mr. Speaker, team proposition would have already satisfied all those arguments and won the debate when we told you this. We told you that the current structure obtained is one with government support, private pension and saving plan. We already said here that Jamaica has a strong foundation and we're not starting from zero. We also concede that the current system still needs improvement. However, the answer to fix those gaps is not to rewrite the entire contract and make the government your default retirement plan. Improvement, Mr. Speaker, is not abdication. Mr. Speaker, we told you about the underusage already creating a moral hazard, argument which stood throughout the debate. The uncomfortable truth is that Jamaicans are not making full use of coverage available and accessible, Mr. Speaker. The result, a hefty burden on the national insurance fund and taxpayers. Even worse, it leads to a moral hazard. People don't save, prepare or contribute much when they think that the government will save them. And Mr. Speaker, that's not compassion, that is enabling. Mr. Speaker, my second speaker told you about sociologist Anthony Giddens, and simply put, responsibility follows agency. Mr. Speaker, where individuals has the capacity to act, they must bear the consequence of their action or inaction. The individual in this case is the primary actor with the capacity to act. Mr. Speaker, on team proposition, we gave you the tools: NIS, private pensions, tax incentive for savings, and where tools are reasonably within reach, the responsibility to use them lies with the individual. The state role is to provide structure, not to guarantee the outcome for everyone regardless of choice. Mr. Speaker, say it with me. The pattern here is clear. Where there's a principal actor, that principal actor has principal responsibility, and if they don't follow suit, they suffer principal liability. Thank you.
We thank the third proposition speaker for her presentation. Thanks to all the debaters in this match. And I now turn over to Aniki, who will bring us to a pause.
Thank you very much, Jermaine. And let's hear it one more time for the teams. Arguments on top of arguments on top of arguments, right? But I have two little teasers, two little questions that we're introducing in this semi-final round. If you were listening carefully, you should be able to answer. I don't want everybody to answer at the same time. Just raise your hand and we'll... No. Which debater said... Ladies, please help me here. You can't save for the future and then no. Too many hands went up at the same time. I'm not able... All right, so which debater said that? Awesome. And which debater said, 40 years to know we are getting old? I don't see any hands. Okay, right. So they did drop some gems. It was a wonderful match, worthy of this the semi-final matchup. Which team will advance to the grand finale? That decision rests entirely with our adjudicators, who will now deliberate and come back to sum up the match and announce the winner and the first finalist of the 2026 Public Sector Debate Championship. For those of you online, which team had the better arguments? Tell us in the comments. And at this point, we now take a break, refresh ourselves, and come back in about 15 or so minutes. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're at the point where we reveal the team that will advance to the grand finals of this competition. But I'm afraid you have a little waiting still ahead because I have some information, valuable, vital information that will inform that decision. The panel of adjudicators thought that we had quite an interesting debate, though that concerned us with respect to some issues with respect to interpretation and understanding of the moot, and so that really did add a little bit of difficulty to our job. Nevertheless, we think both teams did reasonably well and are indeed deserving of a round of applause. To remind you, we had on-side proposition the Administrator General's Department, and yes, and on opposition we had Teaching Service. I want to start by giving a sort of a description and interpretation of the moot. So the moot, although not an actor motion or moot, really does look at a particular kind of an individual. It's an individual who has gotten to the age of retirement, has fallen on hard times, and that individual, while they were working before they retired, had reasonable capacity, reasonable opportunity to invest in a pension scheme that was adequate, but chose not to, for whatever reasons. You know, it could be that they chose to party with the money, or they chose to invest it otherwise. But whatever reasons, they did not. And crucially, they had reasonable opportunity. Now, we spend a little time to discuss what does this mean. We think that while they were working, they had to engage in trade-offs, right? They had to make decisions as to where to spend their money or how to spend the money. Obviously, they chose not to invest in a pension scheme or an adequate pension scheme. But we don't think that the trade-offs that are of concern in this debate are trade-offs that are material and substantial to the person's sort of humanity. We're talking about food. We're talking about health care. Those are not the kinds of trade-offs that the person would have prioritized over investing in an adequate pension scheme. We think that they chose other things, but those other things could have been set aside in favor of an adequate pension scheme. And so, with respect to the interpretation of the moot, we felt like team proposition had a better characterization and interpretation of what the moot requires. Now, it's this individual that we're wondering whether or not, given the state that they now find themselves having been retired and are faced with financial difficulties, does the government now have the primary responsibility? And this, we thought, was not clearly explained as to what primary versus secondary responsibility looks like and how it manifests, how it is mechanized. Yes? We thought that that would have been helpful in separating for us what a secondary responsibility looks like and how that is reflected and demonstrated versus a primary responsibility. Nevertheless, the moot contends, certainly from the vantage of proposition, that that primary responsibility, which we appreciate as a panel as being the first entity on whom the responsibility exists, the first individual or entity who should be expected to solve the problem that exists with respect to the financial hardships. That responsibility is placed on the individual who themselves are faced with the financial hardship and not the state. Of course, side opposition contends it is the state. Good? So with that kind of interpretation out the way, let us now dive into the argumentation. Team proposition contends that one reason why it should not be the responsibility of the state, that it sets up what they contend is a moral hazard. A moral hazard in that people recognizing that the state is there to bail them out when they're working will choose not to invest to save themselves and to secure themselves financially in old age. Right? And they contend that this exists right now and this will continue to exist unless the state declares and sort of acts as though it does not have primary responsibility. Team proposition contends that there's this thing called the social contract theory that obliges and obligates the state to respond and to act to alleviate the burdens, the financial burdens faced by these individuals, right? And so that's how both teams sort of stack it up. Now, from team opposition, we get very broadly applicable principles and philosophies as to the role of states and why states are best capable to intervene in such circumstances. We think that those bits of analysis were really good, except that some of them were not situated within the moot as was being debated. So is it the case that a state has an obligation always, in every single circumstance, to provide your right to freedom, your liberties, and the necessities of life and living? Is that the case, right? We think that team opposition seems to believe that that's the case. Team opposition does not really engage frontally with that kind of philosophical principled argumentation, but we get that they are of the view, obviously, as per their burden in the debate, that the responsibility exists with the individual. So what then becomes of our treatment of the principled argument from proposition as to the role of government versus the argumentation that was not exactly responsive to that broad principle? We think that the broad principle from side opposition, again, as I said before, did not address directly this specific circumstance. We're unclear as to why is it that the government ought to fulfill this responsibility, this obligation, even in these circumstances. And team opposition would have been aided much more had they situated those broad principles within the particular nuanced circumstance being engaged with here. The second consideration or concern that we have is that a lot of the debate centered around, broadly speaking, responding to people's needs. It does not sort of narrow its focus on people's needs, those people who had reasonable opportunity to access adequate pension schemes but chose not to, right? We think that there's something materially different about that kind of individual spoken of in the moot, as opposed to, broadly speaking, the society at large. And so that's why we feel like the principal argumentation of opposition did not certainly address directly the unique circumstances being addressed by the moot. Okay? The second thing that we considered are, what are the implications in either world, in proposition's world, in opposition's world? Proposition tells us that in the world as it exists now, the second speaker specifically, that we have a mass, disengagement of pension schemes. People aren't tapping into and subscribing to pension schemes, and they sort of compare what obtains in the Jamaican context with what obtains in other jurisdictions, right? We think that that was particularly useful insofar as it proved that, one, pension schemes exist. They are accessible. We heard that throughout the debate, which sort of challenges some amount of the argumentation, albeit marginally, from proposition, which is to say that the government may not themselves be providing access to pension schemes to a sufficient extent. It might be quantitatively, we are not sure, but certainly for some reason people are not opting into pension schemes and are finding themselves in detrimental circumstances when they retire. We're unclear from proposition as to why people aren't buying into pension schemes, why people aren't subscribing to pension schemes. And it would have been helpful, second proposition, had you explained to us why this is the case. Albeit, that said, nevertheless, we think that it is a useful bit of contribution in terms of setting some context in the debate. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, the debate, again, was largely a definitional one. It was a debate that really necessitated a clear understanding, and we think that at times, as I said before, the understanding was a little off a little bit, all right? So, in the final analysis, one team ends with 282, and that compares to 277, yes, 277 the winners of this match, ladies and gentlemen, and the team that will advance to the grand final round of the public sector debate competition for 2026. The team ending on 282 points. Ladies and gentlemen, the Administrator General's Department. So I don't think I need to congratulate them anymore. You seem to have done that adequately. So we thank them. But let's big up, let's congratulate teaching service on getting thus far in the competition. And ladies and gentlemen, both teams have another match to play. Teaching service, they are the first team through to the third place playoff, which will happen on the very same day as a grand final match, which so far we know will feature the Administrator General's Department. Ladies and gentlemen, the best debater in this match, and it was a close toss-up between one speaker on one team, the other speaker on another team, and so I will announce the lesser of the two speakers in terms of the points as being the commendable debater. We thought that debater was Roshane Nelson. That's the commendable debater. The overall best debater, ladies and gentlemen, comes to us from the winning team, Cudian King. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's how the cookie crumbles. We are now going to pause okay, all right. So we have a gift basket to be presented to the best debater, and we invite, is it Tomika? Maria. Oh, we have the executive director herself, Maria Thompson Walters, to present the best debater's prize to the best debater. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back with you shortly for the second semifinals match.